Hi, I'm Lou Ann Hunt, and welcome to the February edition of Lynchburg 360. As you can see, the remnants of Winter Storm Jonas are slowly fading away, long after our first major snowstorm of the season. Jonas left behind a mess, and the city's public works crews put in plenty of overtime keeping the roads plowed. But residents always seem to have questions about how the city handles its snow removal operations. So here's Public Works Director Gaynell Hart with the answers to your most frequently asked questions.
Hello, my name is Gaynell Hart. I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of Lynchburg, and I'm going to answer some of your most frequently asked questions about snow removal. Our snow removal priorities are primary and secondary streets first. Primary streets, examples of that would be like Rivermont Avenue, Timberlake Road, the Expressway. A secondary street, an example of a secondary street would be streets like Hollins Mill Road, Ward's Ferry Road, Graves Mill Road. So those are primary and secondary streets. When it begins to snow, we apply a good coat of salt to the primary and secondary streets. We try to wait for that salt to work. We don't plow it off right away. We wait for some buildup on the street and then we begin to plow it off. The third priority is residentials. We do not have enough plows to plow primary and secondary streets and residentials at the same time. So that's why our priority is primaries, then secondaries, and then residentials. So that's often why it's several days before we're able to get into the residential streets. Normally, we do not plow unless we have more than 2 inches of snow. And again, we try to salt the street. That's the purpose of that salt, is to create a brine between the street and the snow so the snow does not freeze to the street, and we don't want to plow that off. As long as the street is passable, we allow that salt to work under there before we begin plowing. We do not salt our residential streets. It is too expensive. Salt is about $117 a ton, so it's much too expensive to salt residential streets. However, we do use 2 different materials. One material is plain slag, which is just an abrasive material that we apply to residentials to help people get grip. And the second material is what we call hot mix, which is slag and salt mixed together, which adds a melting capability along with abrasive to assist people in traveling. Certainly there's several things that residents can do to assist us during a plowing operation. If road conditions are unsafe, it's great if you could stay home. If you don't have to be out, it's great if you could stay home. I know that's not always possible, but if you can avoid travel, that's the first thing. The second thing is, if possible, please park in your driveway. Off-street parking assists us when we do have to go into residentials. It's much easier for us to get in. And the third thing we'd like you to consider is, if you can rally the neighbors and park on one side of the street, that really assists us. When we have cars on both sides of the street, often the snowplow cannot get down there. It is too narrow and too dangerous, and therefore we're not able to plow your street. It takes so long to clear residential streets, again, because of our priorities. We've only got enough plows and spreaders to work on the primaries first, then the secondaries. So after we get the primaries and secondaries cleared or passable for travel, we go into residentials. We do that as soon as possible after the snow. However, we do have 48 hours to respond, but we try to respond before that. So we try to get our primaries and secondaries cleaned up as quickly as possible and then move into the residential streets. Quite frankly, there's not a lot that we can do to avoid blocking in driveways. Again, oftentimes what happens when we get into residential, we plow it, it's been hard packed. Usually by the time it loosens up again, sometimes we come back and plow it again. I know that's very frustrating for people if we come back and get the hard packed snow. If it loosens up and we plow it away, we block driveways again, but it does assist people in getting out. There's just not a lot that we can do to prevent blocking driveways. We do not allow contractors or citizens to push snow into the road. It just adds to traffic hazard. So please try to just keep the snow to the side of the road or in the parkway if you're cleaning your sidewalk. When you see a plow that goes by with the blade up, there's several things that could be happening. He could be returning to the fleet shop for repairs. Also, it could be that we had just put salt down on that road and we were waiting on it to build up and waiting for that brine to build up on that road before plowing. Or he could be traveling to his starting point. So there's a number of reasons why the plow may be driving with the plow up. The way we operate snow, each plow truck has got a route map, and we try to stay to those route maps as closely as possible. And we do not take complaints until the route maps are complete. And unfortunately, the way the route map goes, we can't get to everybody in the first 24 hours or even 48 hours after it snows. We start in one place and it usually takes several days before we're able to complete all the residential streets. So it's just a difficult timing situation. Snowplow drivers are not allowed to stop and help drivers get out of the ditch or get their car unstuck in general. If the police calls for assistance to assist with somebody stuck on a ramp, then we respond. But if we stop for every citizen needing assistance, unless it's a true emergency, we would never get our streets plowed. So we cannot stop on every street and give assistance to all the citizens. Well, we do have a list of those streets and we're going to try to pay more attention to that. However, each truck has got a route map, and so the driver starts in one place, and so probably the people that get the service first are very happy, and the people that don't get the service until a day or two later when the route is finished are not as happy. So again, it's just a matter of timing, and we have started a list of often missed streets, and we're going to try to check on those just a little more often. After every major snowstorm, we do an after-action review where we sit down with all of our crew leaders and our senior leadership staff in snow and discuss what went well and what we can improve. And every year we try to improve upon our efforts in snow removal and become more organized and be able to provide the citizens with more information. So yes, we are constantly improving our snow removal plan. If a citizen has suggestions for snow removal, they are welcome to call me, Gaynell Hart, Director of Public Works, and I can be reached at 455-4406. Yes, we do ask residents to be patient during snowstorms. The staff works very hard. They want to do a good job. They're enthusiastic about removing snow. It's a hard job. They enjoy doing it, but we do ask for your patience, and I understand it's a huge inconvenience. People have places they want to go. They need to get to work. They need to get to the doctor, and we do the best we can on snow removal and are constantly improving our methods as well as our equipment.
If you think keeping the streets clear is a tough job, imagine being the person who has to decide whether it's safe enough to put kids and school buses out on those streets. City School Superintendent Scott Brabrand talked with Steve Smallshaw recently about what goes into those phone calls that parents dread, but kids love to hear.
Hello, this is Cindy Babb with Lynchburg City Schools. School will be closed on Monday, January 25th for students and staff. However,
what goes through your mind when you first see that forecast and they start talking about the potential for winter weather?
How quickly I can run out of town in a car. When I start to think about winter weather, we activate our team. I mean, while the superintendent makes the final decision, it's really a team approach. I have an assistant superintendent for administration and operations, Ben Copeland, and he has Steve Gasky, our director of maintenance and facilities, and Jason Ferguson, our director of transportation, go out and work the roads both the night, sometimes it's that night beforehand, or sometimes it's first thing in the morning to see how the roads are. We work very carefully monitoring the latest reports from NOAA out of its Blacksburg location in Blacksburg, Virginia, that gives us hour by hour data on temperature, wind, humidity, snowfall rates. We work closely with the city, the Department of Public Works, to understand where they are in terms of getting the streets ready to be passable for vehicles, particularly for buses. Because it's not just about a car getting down the street, it's about a vehicle carrying 40 to 50 kids getting down the street safely. And we've been more strategic about working with them and sharing what some of our high priority residential roads are. Not just the primary and secondary roads, but what are those residential roads that are key for us if we're going to get kids to and from school. And we also collaborate with our colleagues around the area to see what they're doing, to see if they have any insights, if the storm's coming up from the south, what's already happening in Campbell County, if it's coming from the west, what's happening in Bedford, or even school divisions farther out. It's all about trying to put our collective best thinking around making sure every student and every employee is safe coming to school. And we have to keep safety paramount as we make these decisions.
And you try to give parents and I guess the students as well and the educators as much advance notice as possible.
We've really worked hard over the last few years. When I first got here, there was some feedback that the decisions were often last minute and didn't allow families or employees enough time to make child care arrangements or to make adjustments in their regular daily schedule. We've tried to be as proactive as possible in letting people know ahead of time, within a reasonable amount of time, what our decisions are, while also trying to make sure we have all the latest updated information available to make the best decision that we can around closing.
And every decision is made erring on the side of caution?
I think there's been a trend in the years I've been in schools that more and more our parents, our employees, and really our community want to be sure we're erring on the side of caution as we make school closing decisions. I think the safety of our children, issues around safety of our children, they've only heightened in the last 10 or 15 years after Columbine, after 9/11. People want to make sure we are doing everything we can to keep their child safe. And when we can lower that risk, there's always going to be a risk, even on a beautiful sunny day, there's always going to be a risk to student and employee safety. But when weather is potentially inclement, what can we do to minimize that risk as much as possible? And we continue to err on the side of caution, but also being reasonable what we know our parents expect. If they've got to be back at work, they really like to have their students back at work too, their children back at work as students too.
There's always going to be folks who say, the streets are fine, why is my child not in school?
Well, I've come to believe that I once heard a former superintendent say the two most difficult decisions as a superintendent were school boundaries and school closings. We've done no boundary changes since I've been superintendent, and I don't anticipate any in the near future. And school closings, we've done a few over the last 4 years. I think we've gotten it right most of the time. I've made a few mistakes, but I've tried to take the feedback I got from those decisions and tried to make it better for this community and for our students and employees. And we're going to keep focused on getting better on making these decisions.
Public Works their message to citizens is be patient. We're doing the best we can. Is that roughly the same message from here?
I think our message is we're going to put student and employee safety first, and we're also going to do all we can to give you the message as early as possible. And we're going to work as hard as possible to get schools ready to be back in use safely as soon as we can. On all these snow days, we have our staff coming in, maintenance, grounds people, custodians, working hard to get the schools ready, the sidewalks, the parking lots. We want to be back in school. We want to be ready to give kids that educational experience. We know many of our kids, as much as it may seem maybe that they would like to be out of school, honestly, after a day or two, it gets old. They want to be back in school. School is where their friends are. School is where the fun is. Learning is fun. And we're going to do everything we can to get them back in.
It's a dark and painful part of American history, but one we can still learn from and strive to understand. From now until March 6th, the Lynchburg Museum is showcasing a powerful exhibit on slavery, with images and artifacts that tell the story of what it was like for a human being to be sold.
Well, we're opening our loaned exhibit from the Library of Virginia called To Be Sold, the American Slave Trade in Virginia. And several years ago, I got a phone call from a museum colleague I'd worked with in Richmond, and he asked if we had any interest in hosting a slavery exhibit here. And he said the Library of Virginia, where he worked, was looking into creating an exhibit. And if we were interested, if we would help support the grant and write letters to the National Endowment for funding, and then if the funding came through, we would be able to borrow it here. The Library of Virginia, we've got a long relationship with the Library of Virginia. We've had any number of their traveling exhibits here, and they've been at the Lynchburg Public Library. So it's a topic that Lynchburg has not talked about much, and we knew they'd do a wonderful scholarly job, and so today we're installing the exhibit, and we'll have it open for the public tomorrow. In the Library of Virginia exhibit centers on two paintings done by an English artist named Eyre Crowe. He's in Richmond in the 1850s and understands there's going to be a slave sale down the street. So he goes and makes sketches and then later turns them into actual oil paintings. And they're some of the few period representations of what slave auctions looked like and how they were conducted. So the images are very rare. They've loaned their copies of the paintings there. And then there are also interactive media programs where you can drill down and learn what the paintings are telling us, and just talks about Richmond as a major slave trade center. Here in Lynchburg, there also was a slave trade here. People were sold at the old city market, which was in the middle of 9th Street near the intersection of Church and 9th. And they were also sometimes sold at hotels in the downtown area. But in the grand scheme of history, slavery has not been abolished all that long ago, about 151 years. There are people alive today who knew slaves, and so it's something that our society has not fully dealt with. There's a lot of it that's misunderstood. So this exhibit also has items from Thomas Jefferson's slaves. Poplar Forest loaned us a case full of objects that they excavated through archaeological digs, and we also have information on Thomas Jefferson and the slave population here at Poplar Forest. Sweetbriar has loaned a very unusual letter. Sweetbriar owns a letter written by a slave to Elijah Fletcher, who at one time was mayor of Lynchburg. Anyway, Elijah Fletcher's daughter founded Sweetbriar College. And in their collections, they have a letter from a slave writing to Elijah Fletcher asking, please borrow me, I'm getting ready to be sold away from the area. And so Elijah Fletcher did buy her. She worked at Sweetbriar when it was a plantation. and during the days of slavery, and then after slavery was abolished, she stayed on as a paid worker for the family.
These two pieces here is a photo and a letter, and the photograph is of Martha Penn Taylor. She was a slave in Lynchburg in the 1850s, and the family that owned her was moving south, and she didn't want to go south with them. So she wrote to Eliza Fletcher, and we have the letter here, and she is asking him to buy her because he already owned her sister, and he did. Eliza Fletcher was a mayor of Lynchburg, former mayor of Lynchburg, and he's related to the founders of Sweetbriar College. And they very generously loaned us the original letter and the photograph. She actually continued to work and live at Sweetbriar after the Civil War.
But slaves in Virginia and other places were not supposed to be taught to read and write, but that was a rule that was often broken. But still, slave letters are extremely rare, and we're thrilled that Sweetbriar's has been generous enough to loan us this letter.
Most of them are receipts for sales of slaves. This is a former slave prison that was in downtown. This is a contract.
Downtown Lynchburg?
Yeah, on Horseford Road. This one is a contract with the Confederate States of America government leasing some slaves. That's what this one is as well.
Well, Poplar Forest was Thomas Jefferson's second home and plantation, and residing on that plantation was a fairly large enslaved population. And as part of the To Be Sold exhibit, we're examining some of the Jefferson's involvement with selling slaves from Poplar Forest specifically. Jefferson sold 40 people in 1791 and 1790 and 1791. And so we're going to be talking about that, what it meant for those people. Additionally, we've been excavating at Poplar Forest some of the places where these folks lived. And so we're able to take some of the artifacts, some of them which may have belonged to these people that were sold in 1790 and 1791, and put them on display and talk about the lives of these people that are they're just names and a list of people that were sold, but these, they were folks that were living at Poplar Forest. These are the things they left behind. So we're able to put them on display here as part of the exhibit.
Okay. Well, this is a barrel crow's plane, and it was used by coopers to make the small incision in the top of the barrel so that the lid could fit on. So this is not an archaeological example. This is from our architecture restoration department. But we have several of the iron blades that would be placed in here that do the actual cutting. So ours are a tiny bit smaller, but yeah, you can see that.
What does it cut?
It cuts through the wood, so when you put all the staves together into the round shape, you still have to fit the lid on. And so what this does is it creates a small groove near the top of the stave so that the lid can fit when you tighten up the metal ribs around it, so that it will stay in place.
Yeah, what we're looking at is daub, or the clay that would be smeared in the cracks of a log cabin to seal up the cracks. It's also used to fireproof wooden chimneys that were used on these cabins that would be smeared on the inside to keep them from catching on fire. And over time, the clay would harden, and we find it archaeologically. In this piece here, we can still see the wood grain from where it was smushed up against one of the logs for one of the log slave cabins at Poplar Forest.
If you get a chance, be sure to stop by the museum and see the exhibit this month. Well, that's it for this edition of Lynchburg 360. Who knows what else Mother Nature might have in store for us this winter? But for now, stay safe, stay warm, and don't forget to take some time and enjoy the view.